Okay, I want to talk about Bob now, one of my favorite writers. Bob is a native of Sycamore, Illinois, and he attended Sycamore High, where he remarkably lettered in 5 different high school sports. And after he finished high school, he went to Rice University on a basketball scholarship. When he got his degree there, returned to Sycamore, married his high school sweetheart, and he was offered a job on the local newspaper, with the remarkable fact that he had never had any journalistic experience and never worked with journalism before. But he quickly found his way to a very down-home type style that people really appealed to most of the people that read, and was really attracted to people like me. It was fantastic technique. He worked for several different newspapers then, and eventually accepted a position with the Louisville Times here in Louisville, Kentucky. And he has spent 33 years as a columnist with the Times and with the Courier Journal. During that time, he published over 4,000 columns. And then he also did hundreds of featured articles. He then developed another passion. His avocation, writing was his career, but his avocation was the upkeep of a 150-year-old farmhouse and 8 acres located in Utica, Indiana. That's just across the river, right at the end of the Lewis and Clark Bridge. And he and his wife, Janet, have developed an impressive nursery. And I hope it's not bad news, but a kind of a quirky sculpture gallery that is in that park. It's very entertaining for those who haven't seen it. In addition to serving as historian of the Parkland Floyd's Fort, he's also working with the committee designing and constructing the botanical gardens down on river, just off of River Road. Just another public service by a generous, compatible, progressive personality who's informed and entertained us over the years and has improved with his efforts the region, the beauty of our region here. We're delighted to have you again here with us, Bob. Thank you for bringing this presentation.
Wow, thank you. I don't want to stop you now if you want to have some more to say about me. I always like to say my academic honors included being the tallest kid in my class 12 years in a row. That's pretty much it. Well, let me talk about
the thing I didn't say, Bob, is that you, in 2015, you were called back to your high school and made a distinguished alumni of that high school, and entered into the Hall of Fame.
I did.
And in addition, you were nominated by your fellow columnists for the Ernie Powell Award for a great columnist in the nation, and that was a great nomination for you to get.
I actually got that. I was awarded that. You know, it's the greatest honor in my life. Ernie Powell, as many of you know, was the classic, World War II, tell it like it is guy. And anyway, so to move on here, the Parklands, to talk about a little bit first. It actually begins with, believe it or not, Frederick Law Olmsted, this whole story. Olmsted came to Louisville in the late 1890s, and created the park system here in Louisville with the 4 major parks and then the pathways to them. And they went on from there. And then about 2004, some local Louisvillians got together and said, what can we do to imitate Olmsted? Let's keep this thing going. And they got together, and Dan Jones, who was David Jones' son, I'll talk more about David later. Dan thought, well, heck, let's just continue the Olmsted tradition. Let's just do it again. Let's find some land like he did that was out of the city at the time, develop it, preserve it, improve it, and make it accessible to everybody. So that's how the whole thing got started, with the Olmstedian idea, and Dan Jones carried that forward. And Dan went to Yale, he got a forestry degree for 2 years. He came back, and he and his brother David, very instrumental in developing this thing, along with Steve Henry, Lieutenant Governor Steve Henry, who started an organization called Future Fund. They were already buying land out along Floyd's Fork. And David and Steve got together, and Dan, and they agreed to put things together. Now, Steve Henry's idea was to have land and preserve it. Dan's idea was to get the land and preserve it, but make it accessible to the public. That's exactly what he did. This is John Floyd, a totally forgotten human being, and he's one of the most important people in Louisville history. People forget about that. He was born in 1750 in Virginia, became a surveyor, worked for a couple of guys named Patrick Henry and George Washington, was sent out here in 1774, just before they settled on Corn Island with George Rogers Clark. And he was surveying lands around the falls of the Ohio to have land grants for the veterans of the French and Indian War. And along the way, he bought 2,000 acres himself. You know, being a pretty smart guy, he got a 2,000-acre grant actually. And it was a tough time. He was out here in 1774, and the Indians, he settled 6 different forts along with Beargrass Creek. And one of them we'll talk about later. Part of it still exists. But the Indians still were controlled here as they should have been. And Floyd said it was so bad that the only reason people stayed here was the Ohio River only ran one way. So he walks back to Virginia, gets involved in the Revolutionary War, gets on a ship, captured by the British, taken back to England. Ben Franklin pays his way to get back to the States. He comes back to the States and comes back out to Kentucky again. And he was an explorer. And the next one, we'll just keep moving here. This is how they named, this is his background here. Among the 2,000 acres he had was Bowman Field and what's now DuPont. Think about that. All that was originally belonged to a guy named John Floyd, who was traveling south to Salt River and was attacked by Indians. He was wounded and he died. There's a house coming up here, and I've been inside this house. This is the forts he had along Beargrass Creek. There was 6 of them, and the remains of them are still there. He's totally forgotten. He was named the magistrate of Louisville. He was a surveyor out here. Thomas Jefferson put him in charge of the area before George Rogers Clark even got here. So there should be a monument to that guy somewhere. I just regret the fact. Here, this is the Bowman Field. He owned the land that's now Bowman Field. He owned the land along now Breckenridge that goes into DuPont. The whole 2,000 acres was his. He fought with Daniel Boone. He came back and fought with the Indians. This is a monument out there near Eastwood. There was 14 people killed here in a battle with the Indians. And the story is they were buried in there in that sinkhole back behind there. Nobody knows about this guy. I really sees this place much. 1781, he came back and got in trouble. He wrote letters back, as they say. He despised being here. He said the only reason he stayed, as I mentioned, was that the Ohio River only ran one way and they had to walk back. He fought with Daniel Boone. He fought with George Rogers Clark. This is the house where he died. It was an estate. And I've been in this house. They're very careful people. They don't like strangers. It's just south of the Snyder Freeway, and it's still there. This is a spring house left from one of the 6 original settlements that's off Breckenridge Lane. It's behind Jamestown Apartments, and you don't even know what's there. It was fallen in ruin, and they eventually the Filson Club got involved because he's buried here too. They wanted to make this a park. It would have been a wonderful park at the time. This was back in, I think, in the early 50s or 60s, and they couldn't get permission or the money to do it. They wanted to have a 15-acre park where the apartments are now, basically. And this is there now. You go off Breckenridge, there's a little bitty plaque, and that's it. If you don't know to look for it, you'll never see it. This is what it looks like right now. That's Jamestown Apartments up here. And you can visit it. And this is the cemetery, which is what happened to it. He was buried here, and it just totally went to hell. And the Filson got in and saved it and put the stone fence around it. Behind that wall is St. Matthew's and DuPont. I-64 runs along the edge of it right now. But this is what it looked like back in the day before they resurrected. This is where John Floyd's buried and his wife. That's the story, and it's still, it's a good story until proven wrong. Those steps in that wall are still there. So if you're ever cruising along Breckenridge, and then we get into what is the Floyd's Fork? What is it? It runs 62 miles. Let me find this. It runs 62 miles up from Henry County to the Salt River. And I went out as part of the story for the Parklands. They hired me to write stories about the people that settled out there, owned the land for 7 or 8 years. I had a great time wandering there. And this is one of the residents. This dude's name is William Potts. And I knocked on the door in rural Henry County. He says, "Bob Hill, what do you do here?" I about fell over. I had no idea my fame reached. This is a guy named Robert Morgan. He was sitting on the porch with his wife. He was a tail gunner on a B-17 in World War II, shot down, spent a year in a German hospital. And we're sitting there talking about this. This is where Floyd's Fork begins, right here, and it runs south to the Salt River. This is Sally Brown of the Brown family. She was a great friend of David Jones. She helped a lot as far as raising money for it. The first time I went to see her, she was in bed. She was laying there with the, and I said, I'll come back, I promise. She was laying with the sheets, but there was nothing nefarious about it. She didn't know who I was. She thought I was a maintenance man. And then I talked to her a little later on, and she's telling me stories, and she said she was born in Alaska. And I said, how'd that happen? She said, my mother was there at the time. So she got me right away. This is Beckley Creek Park. This is the most northern part of the park, runs up against Shelbyville Road and past I-64. Once Dan came back, they started raising money, and they started putting the park together in sections, north to south. This is an interesting place. This is on the backside of Valhalla, Eastwood. There was a train wreck there back way late 1800s, early 1900s. The train fell off the track and landed down here. And this is just, I got this in there because it just happened in the railroad. It was funny. And the train fell off, and the stories, of course, are interesting. They mentioned the dead, and one of them was one of the funniest things I've read in the newspaper. One of the dead was a stranger from California, a bookkeeper from Applegate, 2nd Street, Colonel Field, nuts and nuts. But this is, there's a tunnel here coming up nobody knows about really that goes underneath Shelbyville Road. This was the autograph somebody put there in 1913, just because they could. This goes under Shelbyville Road. And Eastwood's up here. I didn't know it was there. And you can go in there. This is Shelbyville Road, I promise. It's a little different. No shopping centers at that point. But this is a house. There was a man named William Muir, M-U-I-R, who was a slave that worked for people that lived in this house. There's a picture of him here coming up. Very fascinating guy. He was born 1855. This is an old picture. He lived with his family, and then when he moved to town, this is a picture of him in a church called Muir Chapel, M-U-I-R. That's just above the Parklands. It's on either Gilliland Road or Echo Trail. Take your pick, because they all kind of run together there. This is the old chapel. That was an old, in the bottom of the hill. They dragged it up with mules, put it up here. It was a black school. There was no schools at the time. They had church and the school there. And William Muir was the pastor there, also he was free. This is a guy named Dickerson who lives out there. There's a black community out there off of Beckley Station Road in that whole area. And Horace this is Horace's family. Interesting guy. We spent days with him wandering that area, just getting pictures of him and what it was like living out there at the time and talking about his family. And this is his folks, his dad. Horace, I think, was a truck driver. I'm trying to remember. It's been a couple of years since I saw him. Fascinating dude. So we're going out along Beckley Station trying to find the old family cemetery. We finally found it. It was further back over here. He was off by one lot. This building is called a Rosenwald School. There was a man named Julius Rosenwald who was head of Sears way back, and he wanted schools for African Americans. He established 1,700 in the country, 170 in Kentucky, 7 in Jefferson County. This is still there. This was for, the question? This is for black kids. It's on Echo Trail. It's still there. A man I knew owned it. They were trying to redo it. I don't know if it's a residence now or what. I've not been out there in a couple of years. But this was off of, this was the family cemetery. That's all they got at the time. And they had to redo the stones. There were no real stones. So Horace and his brother made these stones for the family in that same area. Okay. This is a guy named Miles, David Miles, whose family owned land just up off Shelbyville Road, going further out. And this is some of the first property that the Parklands bought. They bought 75 different parcels of land. David was very proud of the land and the fact that it was preserved. The family was in his family for years. His dad had it, he preserved it. There was a Civil War skirmish here. This is a little over the top as far as pictures. I just like Civil War pictures. But just to illustrate, there was a Civil War skirmish there, and they went back up and down the Shelbyville Road, basically. They went back and forth, the old bridge there across the Floyd Fork, back and forth during the war. And then they all went off to Perryville and had a hell of a battle over there. This is just some Civil War stuff. I just like to look at this. Thank God I'm not in the middle of it. This is, again, this is Miles' property, the Pay Lakes. Shelbyville Road's over here. This is where it began. The park began up in here. Went for 19 miles, 4,000 acres, all the way down to Fern Creek. Again, all in the way Olmsted would have done it. Preserve it, use it, protect it. This is a couple named Gibbs, George and Betty Gibbs, and they started an American chestnut farm there to preserve the American chestnuts. He put up, I think, $250,000 to do that. And it didn't work real well on that site. They're very specific. So they moved the chestnut grove, I think, somewhere else, and it's done a lot better. But this is the kind of people who donate to the Parklands. It's a donor park, free, no charge. Some of the things you can do out there. This is still Beckley. This is up near the end. This is the egg lawn. I'm sure many of you have been there and seen events out there. This is the one that just got started. Over here is the center, the visitor center. That's Floyd Fort going along there. But the egg lawn was, this is the Osterritter family. There was 13 of them lived out there. And at that time, that was, there was no Snyder, there was no Shelbyville Road, that was the boonies. And they put together 75 pieces. This is cool because keep your eye on the silo. This was the farm, what it looked like, the Osterritter farm. There's the silo still there, only they made a playground. So they preserved the silos what they could. This is the visitor centers. Where, they have events there and weddings and so forth. I can't remember, maybe it's Gaines. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. That's the visitor center out there. And these stone walls were built by a family named Aguilar. Stone walls were part of the park going way back, that area, and these are very popular. So this is what, these have been there probably a couple hundred years, but that's what they use as influence. Again, maintaining what was there before and making it usable to people, but keeping both, looking back, looking forward. 100 years forward, that's the Aguilar family putting together stone. It's an art. I've taken classes in stone walls. It's an art to do that. All you have going for you is gravity, and you got to do it right. Now, they may have stone these together because of the kids. And a lot of the architecture out there was very simple. They called these the leaping bridges. A guy named Jim Walters did a lot of this kind of stuff. He just lived out there. It's a different kind of bridge, and the thing is like a crouching deer, and then whoop, up you go. That's the kind of things they thought about all the time when the Parklands is phenomenal. It's one of the best in the country. And 3.8 million visitors last year. This is what they inherited, some of these fields that needed to be cleaned up and done over again. This is one of my favorite couples ever. This is a guy named Bob Bell. My first story I did out there, they're having an auction for their property, their personal ownings. Bob Bell and Betty. I went out and had breakfast with them. Just instantly likable people, and they had a good, you can just see by their face. This is the auctioneer selling the family stuff, but they kept the old family wagon. She was a Center College graduate way back. This buggy belonged to her dad, who birthed Diane Sawyer's mother. Put that in your peace pipe and smoke it. That's kind of amazing. This is the Grosskirth Distillery, which is totally gone now. A family named Grosskirth started this in the 1930s, and they turned out bourbon, go figure, right here in Kentucky. That's along Echo Trail. This is the assembly line, I guess, putting on the labels at the Grosskirth Distillery. It burned in a fire, gosh, I think in 63, I think. Early 60s it burned. Well, there's a big robbery out there. They stole 232 cases of booze. And when they caught the guy, there was only 175 cases left. So he was enjoying himself before he got caught. But that was 63. Just all great history. The only thing out there now is some stone piers you might see if you knew where to look. Fascinating place to be. $1 million. And the Courier Journal story said the fire was so bright you could read a book a half a mile away, as if that was what you're going to do. Fire over there, let's pull out a book and read a little bit of Dickens or something. But it was kind of a funny thing. This is the bridge, Echo Trail Bridge, the way it was 40, 50 years. This is a new one. Obviously, things have changed out there. They had to do that. This is a really neat, there's a 19-mile contiguous trail for biking and hiking along the fork. But to get up out of the bottom up to the top again, you had to build a special wall. There's 4,000 blocks in there. And it's one of the biggest ones in the United States, if not the biggest of that type. That's some old journalist limping his way up to the top there to check it out. But look at that wall, fabulous. Great design, very careful design. This is the bottomlands down here. This is what you walk up, and the cars, drive and walk. A Pulp Lick is the second park down, and a chain going south toward Bardstown. There's a Pulp Lick monster. This is a legend out there that there was some monster living underneath the Pulp Lick. I went out to find him, and I did. That'd be the original Pulp Lick monster. And it was dangerous because kids were walking this trestle, and if a train comes, you're dead. And that's what happened. There were several kids killed out there, and they finally fenced the whole thing off. This is a great guy named Raleigh Peterson. He had 90 acres along the fork, and he wanted to put in a walnut grove with walnut trees and sell sod eventually. But he fell in love with the trees, and he said, "The hell with the sod." And these trees are still out there. He's got a big walnut grove. And unfortunately, he lost his daughter, and there's a plaque out there too. And this grove is named in her honor. They were married 60 years. He'd go out there and get in his tractor and work his walnut grove. It's still there. Fisherville. That's another little town just out there, past this old distillery, or I'm sorry, the mill is still there. The lower part of it is still there. It was when I was out there last. So more history. This is the bridge across the fork, the Rot Road. And unfortunately, a truck fell through here and broke the bridge. And now Rot Road is dead ended. You can't get through anymore. You have to go around. That's where Denny Crown lives out there somewhere. I've been to his house. This is the famous Blue Rock Hotel, which was the height of fashion in its day. And Louisville's come out there on train or by buggy or whatever to get the airs of being out in the country. This is a lady named Martha Williams. She was the mayor, unofficial mayor of Fisherville. Funny lady. And that's saying Blue Rock Natural Waters. It was a spring. You'd go out there and drink their waters and stay in that hotel and live another 50 years or so if you're lucky. She was a hoot. This is another bridge across the fork, but again, very carefully designed. You'll see a bigger picture in a minute where it kind of tapers from one end to the other. This is probably not OSHA recommended, but he's doing what he can. This is the guy who worked out there. He was the foreman out there. His name was Uncle Joe, and his dog, he said, was the smartest mammal on the place. But one of the things I learned being out there a lot for years is that the construction workers took a great deal of pride in this work, maybe more than normal, because they knew how special this was. These bridges and the design and the walkways, and it's just fabulous. It's just terrific how much $120 million will get you. This is the strand. It's a long connective tissue along the fork that connects the two northern parks and the two southern parks. This is a guy, his name is Lee Honest McGraw. I promise, Honest McGraw. His dad bought all four of his kids' farms, and you're going to farm whether you like it or not. So he ended up in this house out on the forks along Floyd's Fork. And I got a lot of pictures here of his family and what it was like back then. Just a real sense of family and place, and tobacco, of course, smoking. And this is recreation. The fork also was a swimming hole. And why not? This wall is still there. You can see it if you're careful, swimming in the old Floyd's Fork. Just fishing out there, popping and mom or dad and his kid fishing along the fork. It's just a rock overlooking the fork. And this is as I say, it connects the connecting tissue. I just love these pictures. I don't know who they are. This is all part of the McGraw family, the McGraw History House. And that's a great shot of a kid enjoying himself on the McGraw property. Again, it's a big house in the middle of nowhere. Kids growing up, raising tobacco. This is another sweet picture. Just a timepiece of what it was like. And then this is the school out there, and all the kids went to school. Look how they're all dressed. That's neat. That could be, I don't know, Humphrey Bogart. I don't know. It's just what a nice shot that is. Life out there in the 30s. And this is the house again. It was deteriorating, it was abandoned and deteriorating. And you'll see what happens here. One more shot of the family that lived out there in an old wagon wheel. See the telephone pole? See the telephone pole? That was by the house. The house is gone. And then the house is still there, or the tree's still there. This is the ruins of what was used to be there. There's a slave cemetery up on the hill, they said. I never found it. This old cemetery is along the fork. It's a family cemetery. And that's the fork over here. I'm out just, it's really hard to get to anymore because the road's on the other side, I think. And it's private. And but look at this, born in 1799, 1882. I mean, what, 18 or whatever. Just think of the life they had out there and what it was like, just wandering out there. And you can find your places out there. You're all alone by yourself. There's a big beech woods and there's a lot of other stuff. This is a couple named John and Jeannie Ditzler. And he was an ophthalmologist, and they bought his family was from around there, and they bought this place. And they used to just love along the fork. And this is the spring flowers, and this is just lovely. And, you know, again, they're preserving this. I think if they hadn't built the Parklands, they're all subdivisions, or soon to be just doomed to be subdivisions, just because of the park and the fork. And they sold it. This is a couple named Solomon, Kent and Joyce Solomon, who every couple of months would host kind of a hoedown out there. I was invited a couple of times. If you want to sing, you go sing. If you want to stand up and tell bad jokes, feel free. They just invited their friends and family and out along the, I think they still do it. Okay. This is a guy named Harry Jesse. I just liked him a lot. He lived up on the top of the fork. The fork's down there. When he was a kid, he used to go up to Shelbyville Road and get in a rubber boat and float all the way down. And you can still take the fork at the right kind of time. He'd sled down the hill summer times, winter times, I'm sorry. They had events out there early on. This was if you like bluegrass, Sam Bush is one of the best ever. And they do these things now, but not quite so much in the woods. But this was a Sam Bush event out there as a fundraiser and show people what we got. And there's Sam having a good time. That was a fun time. I love bluegrass anyway. So they built a walkway along the strand. So people, and there was a landslide, and they had to build this protective wall. This is going up to Jesse's house. Used to slide down the hill in the winter. This is the walkway from the Parklands, and I had to build that wall along there to keep it from falling in, because it did fall once already. So look at that thing. So you can just walk and ride a bike. And again, contiguous 19 miles. 19 miles. Turkey Run. We'll keep going south. This is Setonville, which was, you know, an old little town out there on the Seton Road, go figure. And this was greater downtown Setonville back in the day. It was like a church steeple and general store, and this is the general store in Setonville. That's the fork here. This is all gone. It's just a field now, of course. This is a Seton cemetery. And there's a guy here named Seton buried here. I'm trying to find there he is, Kenner Seton. Died in 1872. Born in 1797. Affliction sore, for years I bore, physicians were in vain. At length, God pleased to give me ease and freed me from my pain. 1872. There was a covered bridge across Floyd Fork near Setonville. I had no idea. Most people don't have any idea. And this is the new bridge coming in, the old bridge going out. I don't know what year this was. Probably early 1900s. I wasn't able to find out. This is a former Miss America and Steve Henry, and these two brothers lived out there. Funny guys. And they're the ones that tore down Setonville. It was just a wreck, and they just took their tractors, and there was an old safe in the bank, and they buried it. So if you're looking for some money, but that's Heather French Henry and Steve. And I was riding around with this guy in his tractor. What a time. I wanted to borrow his hat. He wouldn't let me have it. This was the refrigerator. It was just a spring back up on the hill. And they hung there, I guess they protected from the predator somehow, but this was a cooler, and they hang it in there, and it all fell in, of course, recently. This is a guy named Bill Burbank. For 30 years, he had the land out there, wondering what to do with it. And finally, they came up with this idea, let's have a golf course at Setonville. So this guy came out of the east somewhere, I forget, and they're talking in the state. They're way ahead of themselves. One of these deals, we got a golf course in the state around there, and houses and all that stuff. But there was no way to get to them at the time. So it was going to be a golf resort in near Setonville, the Watterson Golf Club. Actually, and Floyd's Forks back here. Actually, what became a course for a while. I mean, people played there. basically a pasture. The Pedennis Club was the announcing place, the Executive Country Club, Setonville Road, Bardstown Road. Well, good luck getting there. And it never worked out. They went bankrupt. And but it was kind of fun to think about it. $5 million, 54-hole golf course. This is two people named Anita Payne and Jan Pfeiffer. Jan was the daughter of one of the people who owned the land. And she preserved part of it. She bought a hunk of land over here and kept her house on it. Anita Payne grew up out there. I spent a lot of time with her, just wandering the place. There was a fire at a horse barn here in Louisville. Rock Creek fire killed a lot of horses, and they buried them out there. This was the stone, the cross where they buried them out there. This was a lady named Eunice McMahon. She was 92 when I met her. Again, we just talked about the farm and what it was like growing up out there and the families and just a lot of genealogy. I mean, it's just living genealogy, if that's the words. She was a little smaller than I am, so I thought that'd be a funny picture. I'd go around and just talk to people, tell me about your life. I wrote probably 50 or 60 stories. They're all in the Filson Club. Everyone was protected. They took thousands of pictures. Three guys, Ted Wathan, Bill, and then John Nation. And they wanted to preserve the history more than as much as they wanted to look ahead. The Joneses, and they want to preserve the history. Very interested in that. So it's all there. I wrote about most of the people who live there, most of the land. Did that for 7 or 8 years. Then I got to write a book about David Jones. I just got finished with it. So I did not know David at all. He came up to me one day after a talk I'd given and said, I want to talk to you about doing a book. I met him once, and he said, I want you to write a book about this. And okay, that led to the book about David. 3 generations. Talk about genealogy. Boom, boom, boom. And this tree is 212 years old. It went over one day and they posed in front of it. So you can go back, 18, 17, 16. This is at the bottom of the hill near Setonville. There was a bunch of houses back there and schools. This is a school, I think, where they went to school on it. It's all gone. That's a cool building. It's all gone. This is a church. Let me see here. I'm getting ahead of myself. Cedar Springs Church. I think you get off, maybe it's Billtown Road, maybe, and it just dead ends into it. And then you take a left and go down to Setonville and take a right and go over. That's the basket to put in your money. They got the original one from over 150 years ago. So it was a few $1,000,000 in there. And back in the day, it was like your high school yearbooks. We used to sign them in these silly little verses and stuff. And these ladies had these verses. The oceans may between us roll and, the oceans may between us roll and distant be our lot, but we may never meet again. Sweet friend, forget me not, which is one of my flowers, Miss Rena. So who knows who these people are, but that's just really nice to read that stuff. And they've got this book in this church. These ladies protected that, and they preserved the church and the old basket and that picture, that hair. Genealogy. If you want to go skating on the fork, there you go. Ice skater's dream. This is just, now I get some pictures of the fork, what it's like there. Okay, this is important here. I think the next one has a better shot of it. Squire Boone. Squire Boone, of Daniel Boone's brothers fame, owned 1,500 acres in the bottomlands. He sold it. He never lived there. He sold it. But he lived on the bottomlands there. Or he sold the land on the bottomlands. So it goes back a long ways before. He went off to Indiana and started the caverns after that. This is called the Stout House. This was built about 1800, was upgraded more or less over the years. I've talked to people, families from this house. One family had 13 kids that grew up in this house, one at a time, I guess. This is what it looks like in process. They've since put a better entrance on there. They use it for history and for discussions and so forth, and a lot of old stuff in there. This is another friend of mine, a lady who died. She was fun. I think I mentioned her name earlier. I just slipped my mind, but this is what it looks like now. Again, the Parklands preservation volunteers. It needed a lot of work, transition to put in new trees and plants and shrubs. they put in just tens of thousands of plants and trees and shrubs and took out a lot of stuff, and volunteers. The parkland operates on donors, and it's free. They want to keep it free. This is a guy named Virgil Hawthorne who loved his wife so much, she liked to fish, he built her a pond. So how many of us have built our wives a pond? Is that love or what? This is the Jean family. There's 3 of them. They had 700 acres out there along the fork, and they sold the land to the Parklands, of course. They have the silo center out there now. That big silo, this is ice tongs to take along when you're ice fishing or ice skating, I guess. This is one of the genes. He wanted to be a professional baseball player, and his dad said, no, you got to work on the farm. So just the look on his face, he's saying, man, I'd rather be in New York or Boston or Chicago, and here I am on the damn farm. And this is the Jean family. O.R. Jean was his name. This is the silo center now. This is what it looked like back in the day. And this is now an observation. You can go up there and climb it and look out and see in all directions. And they built an Amish type building here from scratch for events. That's just from the top of the center. It's all cleaned up. This is an older picture. And this is the silo center now. This is a picnic area. You walk the steps up to there. It's really neat. This is the barn built by Amish in Amish style, tobacco barn, but they use it for different events, weddings and so forth. It's a long way from Floyd's Fork. This is just the pathways out there. You can walk these mile, beautiful. That's another shot of the silo center now. Parking lot, the barn, events out here. There's a bike path along here. This is what they do to both, make it accessible and yet preserve it. They put in a path for guys that want to ride the bigger bikes, not in my league. But again, they're preserving and yet allowing it to be used in special ways at the same time. I haven't done that yet. I probably will never do this yet. This would be your eagle. A lot of birders out there. I've been birding out there with some buddies. I don't know how they know these birds, but they don't know how I know so many plants. So it all depends on where you're at, what you want to do with yourself. This is the fork. Another just shot of the fork. This is Munchkinville. So named because the buildings are smaller size. And there used to be the old road went through the middle of town, and now it's a dead end. And unfortunately or not, teenagers would come out some weekend nights looking for munchkins. They'd honk their horns and say, here munchkins, which the locals didn't like a whole lot, but it's just a nice, quiet little place back off, away from history and everything else. It's still there. This is a guy, his name, I think, Phil Bohr. He had family out there. He's related to the original owner. So he showed me around, told me about the history of the place and the munchkins. And this lady lived there for 22 years. I think she's since moved. I mean, it's pretty peaceful now. Come April and May, maybe under 3 feet of water, but there's worse places to be than that. Broad Run is the furthest south park, the one that goes all the way down to Bardstown Road. This is named Virginia Wheeler. This is a house that goes back to the 1800s, early 1900s. I had a reunion out there with the Wheeler family. That was really fun. About 20 Wheelers came out. We talked all day about the history of the place and what it was like and their ancestors and the carpenters, and they've owned the property beginning in 1865. Virginia was a teacher, hence the school pictures. Wheeler Elementary School in Louisville is named for her. Just protecting the family, but the kids all going to school. This is cool. This is a 35 diary and of what it was like. And hang on one second, I want to read this one here. Floyd and Frank worked in the garden. Well, James and I took Sarah to the hospital because she was about to have a baby. And the next line says they worked in the garden. I was at St. Anthony Hospital all day. Sarah had a baby girl and had a very serious time. Baby had been delivered with hemorrhage, followed the baby. Breakfast and lunch, 84 cents. So it's so simple, yet, all this and then breakfast and lunch, 84 cents. This was back in the day of basketball, what it was like, class of 28. And the guys, to me, look like they're 30 years old. She taught in Cloverport High School. This is from Cloverport, actually. But look at the faces on those guys. They don't look like 17-year-olds. Maybe they weren't. But Cloverport High School. This is another Civil War battlefield site. This is Bardstown Road. Way down to the end, there was a Civil War skirmish down here. And again, Bobby's got too many bullets and stuff. But you don't think of Louisville in the Civil War very much because it was pretty much out of it. The Confederates were coming up, and the Yankees came north just ahead of them and kept them off. And again, they went over Perryville. But to drive down there and see all this Civil War, think about the Civil War era and what it was like, it's always interesting to me. So north and south of the park was the Civil War, briefly. I think they misspelled barrel, I think. But look at that. Sheesh. What a bloody time that was. This is just now pictures in general of what it was like. This is not in the park, but there's a falls nearby the park. This is a couple I talked to early on. They sold some of their property. It's Tom Shepperson and his girlfriend, Theresa Hopps. They sold some land just further south, right at Bardstown Road, that enabled the park to connect up from Bardstown all the way up to Shelbyville Road. This is a bridge he built because he wanted to have a better bridge to get back. He built this himself. Again, not OSHA constructed. This is out of sequence. It shouldn't be there. This is a couple I met. They were married 73 years. The week I was talking to them, they owned a farm on the other side of Bardstown Road. And they told what it was like to live back then when Bardstown Road was up a hill, actually, across from them. This was a school taxi, or school bus. They rode to school at, that's her taking a bath back in the day in a cow trough. This is her barn. That's their tractors. This is the Bardstown Road Bridge at the south end there. Again, this is just waterfalls, that area. I think pretty much it's just nature here now. An aerial view of the park. It's just a delight. I'm sure you've all been there by now. It's just a delightful place, and they saved so much of what could have been. The subdivisions popping up around now, I know, all around there. But these are just, what's a guy named Tom Smarr, one of the earlier pioneers. This is a 15-acre woodland garden they built from scratch, very carefully laid out. At the south end of the park, they put in 50,000 plants. I imagine right now it's incredibly, this is a circle they made, again, with the stones filled in with dirt, put in trees. Took them a couple of years to get this all planted. The neat thing about this, here it is, they're planted it with different kinds of trees, a circle. You know, these things are never done. They're not. I've been involved in a lot of gardens, and it's just, you know, you just keep developing and changing. And this is the paths they put in, the rocks they put in. It might be twin leaf, I'm not sure. I'm not much of a native plant guy. This is what it was like when they were talking about designing it, building it. And some of it, this is the playground there off of Bardstown Road. There was one up off Shelbyville. This is the one off Bardstown. And they're very, very popular. Probably a band concert of some sign there. Somebody talking. Again, preserved yet accessible. Preserved but accessible. The Woodland Gardens. This is Dan Jones and the mayor and Mitch and Papa John. And probably when they opened the park up, that particular area. Look at that. There's trees, the woodland path, beautiful overlook. And there's a stone bridge they built here. The guys that built the walls built a stone bridge. It's you'll see it in a minute. I can just feel myself walking up this path right now. It's uphill, but it's not. Look at that. That's dry stack. They put the bottom in, they dry stack that stone. Up over, there's a view over here. Another sitting down place with a view down. Just incredible. That's it. Hold your applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bob. We've got time. Somebody has a question. If you want to hit chat down at the bottom and put your
Sure.
question in. You guys want to, everybody have a question, just hit chat at the bottom and write your question, and Bob will answer. Somebody just, okay, we got one, Bob. It says from Carol Brennan. My fifth great grandfather, Kenner Seton, along with his brothers, and I missed the rest of it. What was the specific question you had? I'm sorry, it disappeared.
I saw that this was coming on your society, and many years ago, Bob Hill, I did meet you down at the Seton Cemetery. I was in town doing some genealogy. It was a rainy day, and
I remember. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, and I saw this and was interested to see what was done to the area, and just saying thank you to the Parklands for preserving the Seton Cemetery and keeping my relatives undisturbed. And yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I still go. I haven't been out there in a while, but I get so busy in my place. But once or twice a year, I go out and just drive through. And the Seton Cemetery was one of my first stops, also when I was writing stories. And I just love that Kenner Seton affliction sword for years I bore. Apparently, that was fairly common. I looked it up, and I thought maybe it was just for him, but it was something that was used in several cemeteries in that days. But the lives they had, the lives they lived. You think about the work and incredible. And they're preserving it. They're preserving it.
Yep, because I was there before it was developed, and I saw the sign for development, and I was quite worried, and I was assured that it was going to stay the same. But yeah, so it's my fifth great grandfather was there, my fourth great grandfather was there.
Wow.
So it was the Kenner and his brothers Rodham and Howson who kind of settled Setonville.
Yeah, I think
and then they destroyed it.
Well, it was decay. It was falling apart. I mean, there was the brothers being very practical people. There was just buildings falling apart, and they kind of finished them. I don't know what was left when they did that. I spent that time with them, and then I had lunch with Miss America and Steve Henry and the two brothers, and fun guys. And they bought that land. I forget how much it was after World War II, maybe $100 an acre, if that, and it just stayed there. I don't know if they're still there or not. I don't know.
I come back into town every now and then and wander around, and yeah. So thank you for keeping it there.
Well, where do you live now? I'm curious.
I'm in Burnsville, Minnesota. So I'm kind of, and I was just looking out my window and it was snowing. It's kind of depressing.
We had a couple other questions that came in, and I didn't catch one of them. It was going to be extended from Broad Run to Bardstown. Do you know about the plan to do that?
It already is. That's where it goes. It goes from Broad Run to Bardstown. Okay. It starts at Bardstown Road at Beckley Creek and goes south through the four parks all the way down to Bardstown Road. Now remember what they're implying, there also was conversation, and Steve Henry's involved in this, of keeping it buying the land from Floyd's Fork all the way down to the Salt River. And that's not what the Parklands is doing at this time. They're really busy. They were astounded. Well, that's the wrong word. They were hoping to get 1 million people out there. They got 3.8 million last year, which may be approaching overcrowded at times. And the parking became an issue, I think. So they've gone from, is this going to work, to, oh my God, how do we deal with all these people? But they're dedicated to the task. The mission has never changed from what it was.
Let's take two more questions. Anybody have a specific question?
Hey, Mel, this is Jack. I've got a general comment. I'll tell you, David Jones was the big promoter of this thing. I know he came knocking on my door in the early days. We were just buying property before any of that was built. The Humana Foundation out there, they matched anybody that donated $10,000 or more. Humana Foundation matched it. So I mean, through the Humana and stuff like that, it was I don't know what they ended up totally donating, but it was a lot. Well, and the early days of that thing, as the parks were kind of taking shape a little bit, that was all volunteer work. I mean, it was all volunteers. There'd be people, man, I met all kinds of people out there that were before they hired people. Eventually, they're hiring people to do that work now. A lot of it, but before it was all volunteers. I mean, you're picking weeds, you were doing all kinds of stuff all the time out there. David Jones is a big promoter of that thing. I mean, I a lot of kudos for that guy.
Yeah, not only that, but he owned Main Street Realty, and Main Street Realty did all of the planning, all that stuff at their cost. I mean, they didn't charge the Parklands anything. And it was just millions of dollars worth of work they did, the engineering, the processing, the hiring, all that stuff. And David, of course, owned Main Street Realty too. So yeah, you cannot say enough about the guy. And the book will be out, I hope, in the next 6 months or a year. And you'll learn even more about him and what all he's done and what he's meant to not just Louisville, but all over the world. Well, thanks for saying that, because it's just all true. Now, Dan really has been the guy, you know, Dan's been the public face, and he's very much involved and should be. But David and Parklands and Main Street were there all the time too.
Anyone else have a question?
Mel?
Mel, there were a couple others that were there. From Carol Whitledge, it said, please talk about the arrangements with families who have left their farms to the Parklands. Can they stay in a home? Do they agree to the Parkland changes like bridges and sidewalks and so forth?
I don't really know. The one thing I do know is that none of that land was condemned. It didn't go through eminent domain. Every single parcel, 75 or 80 of them, was negotiated, and which doesn't happen very often either in the park. And in terms of the particulars, I don't know. A lot of it I know was bare land. In terms of the houses and stuff, whatever they negotiated, and I'm sure they were fair. I don't know. I don't think many private residents or people are living out there at all now. I don't think anybody. I don't know that for a fact. But you know, and
there's still some adjacent landowners out there. Some of the farmers are still out there, and I know the one issue seemed like it took forever to get resolved was some of the getting the strand. It's just a narrow strip that allows you to connect the parks and canoe and place to drop off. But that piece of it, there are still a few of them out there.
Yeah, I think the Solomons were involved in that deal in the strand. I'm not sure. Again, I stayed out. There was a guy great guy whose name I can't think of, the most negotiating. And he played football for Texas, and he's kind of a low-key guy, but just really fun to talk to and interesting. And one of the stories he told was they were trying to buy a piece of property, and they kept calling out there, and the phone was busy for like 2 weeks. So he went out and left a note at the door and said, your phone's busy. And the guy checked and was off the hook. Never looked. And so after they put the phone back on, they got together and he bought the property. Things like that. But I don't know the details of a lot of those. I just don't.
Bill, did you pick up any other questions?
There's one other question, Mel, that has Bob come across information about the Armstrong Dorsey Mills, which were located at the southwest corner of Distillery Bend next to the Great Wall. These were fed by the mill race, which runs down the middle of the Distillery Bend open space.
No, I have not. I haven't heard anything about that. I'd like to know more. I know that they're still looking for histories. I don't work for them per se anymore, but anything I can find that contributes to the histories, I'd be glad.
My name's Joe Aqua. I submitted that question. I've been working with Jack Koppel some on looking for cemeteries, and we found a cemetery in private land just west of there. And through the course of that, I came across information, as well as we can see the remnants of the old mills that were located really close to where that Great Wall is. And I'm just interested in whether there's anybody I could even follow up on with documenting some of that, or, you know, and so forth.
Well, the lady who's I worked with out there was Anna Rosellis Crone. She might be the place to start, because I've lost track. I've been working on, I've been involved with the downtown Botanic Garden for 2 or 3 years now, and working on one in Jeffersonville too, actually. But Anna would be the place to start and see what she's got to say.
All right, thank you.
I'm just
Joe, if you call the Parklands, the secretary there can connect you with Anna.
Yeah,
Anna came on. I don't think she's still with us. She came on right at the first just to peek in to see how things were going. But if you call Parklands, Floyd's Fork, and ask the secretary to connect you with with Anna. You can talk with her. She's very, very interested in its
Okay.
history.
What was her last name again?
It's Anna Rosales. It's Crone.
Okay, thank you.
There's also a guy named Steve Weiser. Does that ring a bell with you at all?
Yeah.
Steve's a local historian and he does cemeteries. He might be able to help you some on that too. I just talked to him about something else.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Joe did find some great pictures that were on Facebook of the cemetery that's right next, about 300 feet from the Parklands or whatever. It's very close anyway. And so we want to get in there, but with COVID at this time, I really hate knocking on doors. So
Yeah.
we're being delayed a little bit anyway.
The speaker there is Jack Koppel, who is our cemetery specialist and does all kind of work. I guess Joe helps him with some with that, but they do wonderful work in finding and helping find people that will help preserve cemeteries in our whole region.
And I'll give just Joe a pat on the back. He is great with maps, research, wills, and everything else. He's terrific and been helping me find some cemeteries.
Thanks, Jack.
I've got a question down at the bottom here. Are new parks going to be added to the Parklands? Do you know?
No, as I said before, I think they're pretty much interested in taking care of what they got. It's almost 4,000 acres. And as far as going south, that's Steve Henry's been doing it. I've talked to Steve about that a little bit. And I think they do have some land on the other side of Bardstown Road and are working their way down. Well, at this point, I don't think the Parklands is, they want to be part of, they already are part of that 100-mile loop around Louisville, which is interesting too. But I don't think so. I don't know for sure.
Rose asked a question about a handout. We do not have a handout, Rose. I'm sorry.
Filson has all everything I wrote's in the Filson, and all the pictures that those guys took, and they're phenomenal photographers.
Yeah.
They're all put away. They wanted to preserve history. Very much interested in that. It's always a pleasure to talk about the Parklands. Myself, actually, it's been a couple of years since I looked at any of this stuff, and I get amazed myself sometimes what they did out there. Because I was out when I first started with them. There was 4 people in an office down in Main Street, and that was it. And the dreams. And then that was in 2008 maybe, and then I think 2011 was the first park open, and then 2019 it was done, and revisions ever since. Very busy place.
Thank you so much for everybody being here. It looked like we had a total of 68
Whoa.
in all, and hope we see you again at our next meeting. Thank you so much.